everybody. We are small in numbers today, but it's okay. Maybe everybody's feeling tired along with the Kefarim.
Oh, that's right.
They had their lock-in last night, so the service will be strange today because all the Kefarim and Kefarim leaders are at home in bed because their lock-in ended an hour and 40 minutes ago. So we are beginning the final book of the Torah today, which always makes me think several things. One, I'm like, oh, I'm sad, it's almost over. We're almost, like, I feel like Moses is like my best friend by this point, so I'm like, oh man, we're about to like leave him for a while when we finish Deuteronomy. It also means the high holy days are coming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's an interesting season. Deuteronomy, I think, is probably my second favorite book of the Torah after Leviticus. So I'm excited. I'm excited about Deuteronomy. So if we think about, so really kind of what I want to talk about today is really kind of, maybe we'll talk about Acts a little bit too, if I can get there. But it's kind of just like some major principles and themes about the Torah, because Deuteronomy, like if we think about the structure that we've talked about before of the Torah being like a mountain, Deuteronomy and Genesis parallel each other as the base or the foundation of the mountain. And then we had, Exodus and Numbers, the midsection, and then Leviticus, of course, is the high point.
Of course.
She didn't make that.
Whether you like it or not, it is, most scholars agree on this. Leviticus 16 specifically is like the high point of the Torah. So
Absolutely.
This is not just me. This is like, if you look at how different scholars lay out the structure of the Torah, that's how it lands most of the time. So it's not just me.
Although I do know somebody who would debate you on
Yes,
this.
there are people who disagree, even in this congregation.
Yes.
Who have degrees more advanced than mine, but I'm still willing. This is the hill I will die on. Yes.
Yeah.
Can we know who would disagree in the
No.
congregation?
I might.
Just start talking to people, and you'll figure out how they view the Torah. But I was going to say something else about that. But anyway, so basically we're coming back down the mountain to Deuteronomy, and so Deuteronomy has a specific, as all books of the Torah do, has a specific function within. Sorry, my dad is in the hospital, so my sister is texting updates, and I'm just very anyway distracted by that. Sorry. So we've come back down the mountain, and we're back to this foundational. So Deuteronomy has this like specific role to play, and I kind of want to talk about what that is, because really, so Deuteronomy is interesting. All books of the Torah are unique. They all have their own specific purposes. They're trying to communicate something, and they're all part of the greater narrative. We know all this. But Deuteronomy, there's not a lot. There is some kind of new information, but there's not a lot of brand new information, particularly like when we look at this week's portion. Really, we're reading. You know, Moses is really recounting things that have already happened. So there's not a lot of new information. So then it's like, well, why? Right? Like, why are we going back through this? Like, some of this is pretty fresh. We just did this, right? It's like we've just recently talked about the spies going in the land. We've just recently talked about, even Joshua being kind of, I don't know what you call it, ordained, leadership being passed, whatever word you want to put on that. So like, why do we have it again? So we're going to kind of just talk in the kind of bigger picture kind of terms. We can get down into there's a couple things in this portion that like small details that people really like to zero in on, which is fine. We can talk about some of that, but I kind of want us to look bigger picture today. So when you look at Deuteronomy, what's going on? Why do we have Deuteronomy? What is Deuteronomy trying to set us up for? What's its purpose? That kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, I see it as Moses. They're at the border. They're ready into the land. Moses wants to send them off because God has told him, although I think in the Deuteronomy is where he's still praying that he can go, and God says, stop praying, you're not going. But it's a review of where they've been.
Mm-hmm.
It's giving this new generation a historical context of where they've been and therefore where they're going. And it's an exhortation to choose life, not death.
Yeah.
Which the commandments are not too hard for you.
Right.
You can do them,
Right.
he says later on in chapter 30, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like a charge, giving them what's been, what is now, and what is coming.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love Deuteronomy.
Mm-hmm.
It's my favorite. So because it kind of gives us everything that's there. And Yeshua loved it too, because I understand Deuteronomy he quoted the most of any of the Tanakh, or at least the Torah.
Probably the Torah, because there's
he might have quoted more prophets.
Yeah, there's some Isaiah and a lot of Psalms that he quotes also, so I'm not sure how they all lay out, but yeah, of the Torah for sure. Yeah, it's good.
When he was tempted, did he only quote from Deuteronomy?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, why I love Deuteronomy. And I do think I think this is the portion I taught on last year.
You might have, and see, I thought that I had taught this portion before, but I don't think I have. I didn't think it was last year, but I was looking back through my notes and I couldn't find any notes from this portion, so apparently I haven't taught this one.
Yeah, I think I did this one last year, and I think what I liked about it so much is there's a couple dimensions to this. First of all, I've always kind of viewed Deuteronomy as Moses' last will and testament, and I also see the same. To me, I see the same desire and urgency in Moses that Yeshua had that last week. Like, you guys have got to get this, and you've got to get it right, because my end is coming, and I want to make sure. But with the second generation also, I figured they've been raised by these parents who were definitely rebellious in the wilderness, died in the wilderness. Some of them could have died with a chip on their shoulder because they knew this is where they were going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like Moses is retelling the story to the second generation to make sure they get the story straight.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times when you're dealing with parents or people or situations where people are angry or have been, their side of the story might be very different than what Moses wants to relay out and say, I want you guys to know this story straight. I need you guys, I just feel like this urgency that you've got to know the story, you've got to know this stuff. And so we know he's coming to the end, and it makes me also think of like when you talk to Stan and I kind of did this a little bit with our parents towards the end. Like we knew that they were getting close, and there's like stories you don't know all the facts on. Mm-hmm. And it's like, and if it dies with them, do you know it type of thing.
Right.
And so this, I think a lot of times when people get towards the end of their lives or towards the end of their ministry or whatever, they want to get this point across, and get the facts straight before they step out of the picture. And so I kind of feel like I always feel this desperation on Moses to get it down and make sure you guys do this right. Like, I've been doing this with you for a long time. I'm heading out. Let's do it right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of, I think, why I love this book is I feel like he's just setting the record straight.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of also look at it as, which is it's a slightly different thing, but like I kind of also look at it as it's almost like parents sending their kid off to college or something.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've talked about like Israel has kind of had this like from Exodus on, like we're seeing this nation of Israel kind of growing in maturity and trust with the Lord, and they kind of start out like toddlers, like whining and complaining and throwing tantrums. Mm-hmm. And And it's because it's building trust. It's building this relational trust with the Lord. And I think that that's a lot of what we're seeing in the process. So now I feel a little bit like, it's like Moses is a little bit like, all right, now you have to go off on your own. And that's not really true. Joshua's with them, the Lord is still with them. So the analogy does break down very quickly. I realize that. But sometimes it feels a little bit like that. It feels a little bit like, okay, don't forget. Don't forget all these things that happened, which is also, like you're saying, a kind of like a, And Moses does know he's about to die, right? God told him that he's not going to go in, that he's going to see it, that he's going to, all these things are going to be put into place, and then he's going to die. So I think it does change your perspective on life and what you say to people when you know that death is imminent. So I think, and Deuteronomy is very much like, so some people kind of talk about the Torah within the Torah. So we use the term Torah to refer to the 5 books of Moses, the whole Torah section of the Tanakh. But if you kind of go down into that, it's, you think about, is it all instruction? Well, yes, it is. But then it's like, and this scholarship does this sometimes too, a lot. I was challenged on this by some professors of be like, make sure you know what you're are specific about what you're talking about. I'm like, okay, fine. But because it's like the giving of the law, right, on Sinai, the giving of the 10 words, the giving them the commandments themselves. So much of Leviticus would be, the Torah itself, the book of the Torah. Because even like towards the end, I didn't write down the reference, but later on in the book of Deuteronomy, it talks about the book of the Torah. So it's like talking about the book of the Torah within the Torah. It's talking about some specific portion. So there is this idea of that, and I was looking back through the Torah Story, which is a really great book on the Torah, and I was looking back through some of my highlights from when I went through it last year, and I liked this one. And he talked this like it's describing kind of what he calls the macro view of Deuteronomy, and he says it's the instruction of the instruction, that is the Torah of the Torah. It's the beginning of the gospel. This instruction is not too hard. It is in your mouth to teach it to the next generation. So, which is what Jim was bringing up earlier, which is also one of my favorite things about Deuteronomy, that it says that. It's like, this is not too difficult for you. So I like this, and I like this idea that it's the beginning of the gospel, right? We talked about Yeshua quoting from this. We've talked about, like Yeshua, this is a core principle of even, I would say, the entire Messianic Jewish movement, is that, Yeshua did not come to, we quote the verse that he did not come to abolish the law but fulfill it, and that meaning that he came to bring fullness to it. He came to bring greater understanding of it and greater understanding of what the Lord is saying through the Torah, and the Torah is so foundational. And I have really felt this, like that, I've spent more than 10 years going through the Torah every year at this point. And so at this point now, I know it well enough that it's like I see it everywhere else, right? It comes up everywhere else. And the entire rest of the Bible is consistent with what's found in the Torah.
I'm just gonna, the first, I don't know, I've been a believer for 40 years, but the first time I really was driven home what he just repeated there in Deuteronomy 30:11, that it's not too difficult for you. It was kind of like, well, I thought Paul said it was too difficult. So, and then John in his first epistle says the same thing. It says, this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments. Commandments are not burdensome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, then I thought of Peter, in Acts 15. And it kind of seems like he says that they are too difficult or burdensome, but my perspective is that he was saying that for the Jewish people to keep the commandments is not too difficult, but to be a wholly separate people from everybody else, that's been the rub. That if you're different than your culture that you're around, that is pretty difficult. I don't know what others think and said about that, what Peter said there in Acts 15. But to me, that I knew he wasn't talking about keeping the Torah because of Deuteronomy 30:11 and John and 1 John 5 here. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so this ends up becoming a big issue too. Is it because it's like, does it mean that everybody is required to keep the whole law? And we here, meaning Kingdom Living, meaning Tikkun, would say no. Jewish identity is wrapped up in this, and also there's this distinction. So through history, Judaism has become synonymous with rabbinic Judaism, and I think even what Paul is pointing to, even in the first century, is that there have been practices and that have been put into place that are not. They are meant to connect with the Torah, but they're not directly commanded in Torah. And to keep that standard, and because at that time we have a lot of, in the first century, there's a lot of dispute between different Jewish groups of what being Jewish is and how you're supposed to live and all these different things. And so I think he's saying, and I think we're still seeing this, is that it is too difficult actually to uphold all these extra things. We call them fences around the Torah. It actually is too difficult. And it always comes back to the heart. We've talked about this too with Yeshua's interaction with the Pharisees. Yeshua is rarely disagreeing with the Pharisees. He is calling them out on their hearts, because the Pharisees are like, your life has to look like this. You have to do all of these things so that everybody sees how righteous you are. And Yeshua's like, it doesn't matter if you do all those things if your heart is not in the right place. And so it always goes back to this heart issue, and it talks about, and I think, no, I don't want to misquote it, so maybe we'll look at it. I think there's a couple places that it says this. Well, and the Deuteronomy 30, yes. So the end of Deuteronomy 30 is where it talks about the Torah is not too difficult for you and things like that. But earlier in that chapter, in Deuteronomy 36, it says, also Adonai your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants to love Adonai your God with all your heart and with all your soul, so that you may live. So it's about, it goes back to, it's about the heart, right? And we often point to, the prophets talking about being given a new heart, or the Torah being written on your heart, but it's even in the Torah, right? And so it's not just about all the ritual, and it's not just about, not that those things aren't important, because ritual and practice is how you maintain identity, particularly that's how the Jewish people have maintained Jewish identity when they haven't had a land of their own for most of history. So I'm not saying that we don't do those things, it's just holding things in the right order.
Yeah, I totally agree. I see Yeshua's conflict was when the traditions ended up contradicting or conflicting with Torah, with the obvious reading of Torah, that you do love your parents, you do honor your parents, you do support your parents. You don't say, because I'm giving this money to the temple or whatever, some kind of offering that I would have used to support and honor my parents.
Right.
Then you're contradicting, you're going against what plain reading of Torah is.
Right.
And so he upheld tradition, because like he prayed before a meal, feeding the 5,000, he prays, he gives thanks, and that's not a Torah commandment. That's a rabbinic, well, we wouldn't call it rabbinic because rabbis didn't. Well, anyway.
Right.
It was a tradition. It was a tradition.
Sure.
And so he upheld traditions.
Right.
And he said, it was right, it was fine to tithe, but just don't use tithing as a reason to not honor your father and mother.
Exactly, right, because it all comes down to what did Yeshua say, and what does the Torah show us? What are the two greatest commandments? Love God and love neighbor. And so if you're and they work together, right? That's all the that's all the Torah. That's what I love about Leviticus, because I feel like Leviticus is all about like, how do we live so that God's holy presence can remain in our midst, and how do we have really good relationship with one another, and how do we make it right when we do mess up, and how do we all these things. So I think I had another thought and I forgot it, but so anyway, so we're seeing all this play out, and we're seeing that. Oh, and I was the other example I was going to bring up. So yeah, like there are I don't know the right word to use. Extra biblical traditions. I don't like to use that phrase either. I don't know the right term, but it's like,
Plus the oral law.
Yeah, and there's a lot of debate about the oral law. It all gets very complicated. But anyway, because candles on Shabbat, also not in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that's a bad tradition? No. But does it mean that you can judge someone's righteousness based on whether they light candles on Shabbat? Also, no. So there's a lot of debate about there, particularly within Messianic Judaism, and I don't want to follow this too far, because I don't want to get too in the weeds on some of these big issues of like, how much credit do we give to the rabbis and how much do we follow rabbinic teaching. We tend to lean less on that than many Messianic circles, because there's a lot of evidence. One of the reasons, there's multiple. I'm going to try to nutshell this and then move on. But one of the reasons is that there is some good evidence that what we now know as Rabbinic Judaism was developing actually alongside Christianity in the first few centuries after the death of Yeshua, and it seems very possible that there's at least some portion of rabbinic writing and teaching that was developed in opposition to Christianity. So, do we want that to be our authority if it's against Yeshua? Probably not.
Yeah.
Does that mean we disregard all of it and we can't learn? I mean, there's a lot of things we can learn about Jewish thought. I'm not saying it's worthless. I'm also saying that because the rabbis say it's probably not the argument we wanna hang our hats on. Yeah.
Yeah, because our faith, I don't know. This is just my opinion, obviously. Our faith was developing in opposition to Judaism, and so there's this back and forth as Christianity became a thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't a thing for few hundred years, but as it became a thing, then and it became in opposition to Judaism. Then Judaism, like you said, started pushing back against Christianity. So there's kind of this back.
And so there's been this tension too, and so yes, and of course yes, Christianity did start to define itself in the opposition, and this is a major issue that we find ourselves in for most of Christian history. The parting of the ways we call it the parting of the ways, when Christianity intentionally separated itself from Judaism, which most formally happened. It was already starting, and there's some writings and some things that go with that, but really became pretty solid in the 4th century. If you haven't read Finding Messiah by Jennifer Rosner, she does a really good job of overview, and she ties her story. She's a Messianic Jewish woman. She was one of my professors. She's a very well-respected scholar. She works in the area of Jewish Christian. She's wonderful. She was my favorite professor. But she's written that book it weaves her story with coming to know the Lord and trying to find her place within both Judaism and Christianity, and the Messianic movement, as well as some like foundational Messianic theology points, including, she does a really good job on Parting of the Ways. And a lot of the times when I've taught on Parting of the Ways, I use her material from her classes, from the material that I got from her teaching my courses, because it's really helpful. So, moving on, yes.
I just wanted the
Rosner, Rosner.
It's a good book. The is it too difficult? Is it not too difficult? The thing that makes it not too difficult is the fact that we have the Holy Spirit.
Right.
And we've got to bring the Ruach into this, because Yeshua basically said, I'm giving you a helper. And so the things that we're being asked to do, especially if we're looking at the New Testament on how to live a righteous life,
Mm-hmm.
we have a helper. So this should not be too difficult
Right.
to do.
Exactly.
Because we're not doing it on our own strength.
Right. Which, well, I'll go ahead.
I just want
Go
to
ahead.
clarify, when I said Christianity became a thing, I meant there was enough people that
Yeah.
started influencing society, it became political,
Right.
and so it had an effect on the Jewish community, sadly, a lot of times in a
Yeah.
negative way. So
Yes,
that's what I
absolutely.
meant about
Yeah.
Jesus,
Yeah.
or
No, that's
Christianity
good.
became a thing.
That's good. That's good. Yeah.
The ICEJ has been doing a weekly teaching on the Council at Nicaea, and that's been helpful to really show, some specifics that really grew out of Catholicism. And, as a former Catholic, it's really important to discern, what are heresies of man, that have been added to
Yeah.
the scriptures.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it does happen on both sides. It happens in Christianity and in Judaism.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's our journey.
The human element.
Huh?
The
The human element. Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, I have to grab the cajon.
No, you're
Oh,
fine.
guys.
Sorry, I was like, what do you need? Do you need me? Do you
No.
Hi, Matt. Are
Hi,
you our
guys.
guest speaker today?
Do you want to
Very
teach us
briefly.
Deuteronomy?
Next time. Next time. Have a good time, guys.
So what Lori was saying is like, this is part of actually where I wanted to go, and I was trying to decide how I wanted to get there, but you just set me up for it. So have you ever noticed on our reading schedule that we read the book of Acts alongside Deuteronomy? So it's not so intentional necessarily, but it works out nicely. Because one of the ways I view, well, I read you that quote a little bit ago that talks about how the Torah is the beginning of the gospel, right? Acts, honestly, sometimes I lump Acts in with the Gospels, and a lot of times people will talk about that when they categorize the New Testament. It's like the Gospels and Acts, the letters, but because really Acts is Luke volume 2, which is also why I feel like they should be next to each other,
Yeah.
which is also why on our reading schedule, if you hadn't noticed, we read Luke alongside Numbers, so then we can read Acts right after it. It makes me so happy. But also, when we did that, which is just a couple years ago that we started, that we changed that, because we used to just read Matthew through Acts, like in order from Genesis, alongside Genesis through Deuteronomy. But I had a very passionate conversation with Rich at one point. He's like, this is not a bad idea. Let's think about this. So here we are. But putting John, so how we made that work is we decided to, pull John out and read John alongside Genesis, which also ends up being really cool because there's some interesting parallels between John and Genesis, even to the beginning of the, it's
Right.
like, Genesis 1, you're reading in the beginning God created the heavens. And in John 1, you're reading in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. It's just kind of fun. So it actually all worked out really well. But anyway, Deuteronomy and Acts. So Deuteronomy, one of the ways I look at this is it's like, because it's kind of recounting a lot of what has happened and preparing them to go in the land and to live the rest of history. It kind of is giving, and the new instructions, I can't remember what book I was reading. I read a couple different books in the last couple of days, and I can't remember which one it was in now. I didn't write it down. But was talking about like many of the new commandments that we get in Deuteronomy have to do with when you're in the land. So some think it's like Moses didn't fully explain them. We don't have the written record of them because they weren't applicable yet while they're in the wilderness. They're going to go into play when they are in the land. And so it's very much okay, we've lived this story to this point. We've set you up, again, like we've talked about, we've kind of come back down to the foundational level of the Torah, of the mountain that we're building with Torah, so to speak. And so it's kind of the like, okay, and now here's how you live when you go in the land, and here's how you think, how I want you to think about God. Here's how you have to love God. You have to, being obedient to the Lord has to come out of loving Him. All these kinds of things. In the same way, Acts, coming right on the heels of all the gospel accounts, is very much the like, okay, Yeshua has walked among you. God has, He has come as the Messiah. The Messiah has come. He's died. He's resurrected, ascended. What? And Acts is very much that this is now how you live out this new reality that the Messiah has come, right? So I feel that parallel in Deuteronomy and Acts of like, okay, so now that the Torah has been given, this is how you live in Deuteronomy. Now that the Messiah has come, this is how you live in Acts. And they pair very well, actually. And they're not in conflict with one another. One of the principles that I read, that I use when reading the Bible, is that if something seems to contradict or something seems to cancel out something that came before it, I'm probably wrong. I need to look for another explanation. I need to look for another understanding. So, because I don't think that the character of God changes. Do I think that Revelation is progressive, that we learn more, that we have greater expectation as we go, and that God is revealing Himself over time? Yes. But I don't think that means it's like all of a sudden there's this new part of God that never existed before that's coming out that then cancels out these previous things. I don't think that's how that works. I don't think you do either. I'm just talking when we look at biblical exegesis, sometimes these are things that come up. And even going to like Acts 15 and things like that. And it's like, it is important to say that Acts 15, because the question in Acts 15 is what is required of the Gentiles, right? And the decision is they have to, there is a standard, but they are not required to take on the whole Torah, meaning they're not required to become Jewish. Because what does it mean about God if everyone is required to become Jewish? It means He's the God of the Jewish people, not the God of the whole earth, and that's not who He is. And the calling, and going back to some of what we were talking about earlier, is like some of the issue with how some of the Torah has been taken to and has been interpreted about how you live is it does cut off. It has been used to cut off, sometimes for protection, and I do understand that, cut off the Jewish people from kind of the rest of the society. Like sometimes they keep to themselves, right? But what's the calling of Israel?
To be a priestly nation.
Yeah,
To
be a light to the nations, to draw all nations to the one true God, right? And so if living, and I think Paul exemplifies this really well, and this is why it's such a good thing that scholarship has come around to realizing that Paul lived his whole life as a Torah observant Jew, even though he was the apostle to the Gentiles. And going back to what we're saying too, is just like, right, Paul didn't seem to have an issue being Jewish and interacting with Gentiles. Right? And so he's living a life that is showing us that the goal is not for Jewish people to live a life that prevents interaction with other nations and other people, right? And so, hold on a second. And so, and at the same time, he is a Torah observant Jew. There's times when he says, I've never done these things. I've never, and Peter as well. Again, going to Acts 10, right? He sees these unclean animals, and the surface explanation sometimes people will give is like, well, it means that all food is kosher. But if that's not what Peter is saying, if Peter is saying show me what this means every time, then he's understanding it means something else. And the Lord is talking to him about interacting with Gentiles and not not being like, I can't interact with Gentiles because they're unclean. It's not talking about kosher. It's not about food at all. So anyway, all that to say is it's like, again, going back to looking at the Torah and what the purpose of it is. Are Jewish people meant to still live as Jewish people when they follow Yeshua? Yes, we believe yes, because God called Israel to be this particular nation that, again, is meant to be a light to other nations and meant to point that. And also, and then on the counter side of that, right, is the nations, believers in Yeshua from the nations are meant to provoke Israel to jealousy, right? They go. There's two sides to the coin. We both have roles to play. Those are Jewish and those of us who are Gentile. And to then, and it's, you know, again, going back to one of these core foundational principles within the Messianic movement is like if either one is trying to become the other, then we have basically said that, God, I don't want to be who you created me to be. And I don't want to do that. I want to know, who did the Lord create me to be? What is my role in, right? We've talked about the body. We've talked about how we all need to fulfill our roles and our callings within what he has created to bring his kingdom, right? Do you have something?
Yeah, that, going back to like what we talked about, you know, traditions. So that was, at my understanding, is that was the conflict between Peter and Paul, was that Peter was the one that, you know, the vision came down, and the interpretation of the vision was not food, it was Gentiles. Don't call a Gentile unclean. And so as I see it, this conflict that Peter and Paul had at one instant, one moment in time probably, I'm sure they reconciled, was that they had a tradition that they don't eat with Gentiles,
Right.
and other traditions that were great fences because it protected them from eating food that was sacrificed to idols. Because your expectation would be, if you ate with a Gentile,
Right.
they're providing food, and if they're providing the food, they're providing food that's been sacrificed to idols. But I guess Paul's emphasis was, these are brothers, they've been going to the synagogue, they've heard the Torah taught, they understand who we are, we understand that we would not come and give them food that sacrificed to idols. So we can be in table fellowship, and it seems like that's a lot what Paul was addressing. How do we, as Jews, follow Torah and some extent of our traditions that we see are good fences, but then interact with Gentiles that don't have that commandment that you have to eat kosher. I'm sure they're free to eat kosher, but that's what they chose to do. But yeah, so this whole thing of traditions, lay down your tradition if it provides a environment of, you can have fellowship with others that don't have that tradition. Maybe they are Jewish, but they don't have a particular tradition, so you can still be friends.
Yeah.
When I read Acts 15 and like the beginning of it, I find it helpful to see, you know, what's the issue they're talking about.
Right, for sure.
So when it starts off and it says some men came down from Judea, that's 15:1. They began teaching the brethren, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. So it was a salvation, at least when I read, it's a salvation issue they're talking about. That the Gentiles do not have to become circumcised or convert to Judaism in order to come into the kingdom.
Right.
And then, and I know it's a controversial, as you do too, but when I read the conclusion, you know, what shall we do? What shall we say to the Gentiles? And they say for those few things. And then at verse 21, for Moses from ancient generation, for Moses from ancient generations has in every city those who teach. Sorry, I'm looking at the light. Those who preach him, since he is read in the synagogues every Sabbath. I can't get away from looking at that as a beginning, for they will learn as they go. It's not necessary for their salvation, because certainly there's more in Torah that applies to Gentiles than just those four things.
Yes.
Right.
And yet the conclusion is also, I don't think that we can draw the conclusion that there are some that teach that, yes, this is just the beginning. As they're in synagogue, they'll learn the rest, and eventually they'll keep the whole Torah.
Well, not.
And that is not, we don't want to swing all the way there.
Sure.
So yes, there are certainly principles, there are certainly other things in Torah that apply than just those four things. But yes, it's a salvation issue, and it's saying, because, and here's the thing, there's always been Gentiles in the synagogue. We call them, the term we now use for them is God-fearers. So there have always been Gentiles who have aligned with the God of Israel to whatever extent they're capable of. There are cultural and socioeconomic and other issues that make it really hard for a full conversion, including the fact that they could be put to death for that. And so this is going back to say, it's saying that, like, yeah, the cost is too high, to say full conversion for salvation, right? And you're right, it is good. Like, we're looking at a salvation issue here. It's like, can a Gentile come as they are and receive salvation? Yes, right? And yes, there is going back to, I think also going back to even the Great Commission in Matthew, like, right? It says, does it say, go and get everybody saved?
No, it says go and make everyone
Go and
disciples.
make disciples,
Of all the nations.
which is different than go and get everyone to declare allegiance to the king. So I think it's a discipleship thing. I think it's what it's pointing to in Acts 15 is then a discipleship. It's like, do you have to convert to even receive the salvation initially? Of course not. But then you are still expected to be discipled, right? Which is, I think, how we're seeing play out with Jew and Gentile through the rest of Acts and the rest of the New Testament, right? Like, and that's also why it's important to, like, whichever letter you're reading, to know who it's written to, right? Like, Peter's writing to Jewish people, James is writing to Jewish people, Paul's writing to Gentiles. Like, so is there overlap? Yes, but the audience does matter, right? Yeah.
Paul Blake, who was the founder of Kingdom Living and is now in St. Augustine, Florida, with a congregation there, has a whole, that was the subject of his thesis for his doctorate. And he has, he's got a website called the X15 Society, and he goes all the different thoughts. Well, this means this, it means this, and so if that gets you excited, if you need to go down in the weeds and get all the pluses and minuses, he covers it very, very well, all the different ramifications. And
yeah, that's good. I had forgotten that he had that website, so that's good. Valerie.
So, kind of
find us
with the identity thing.
Yes.
So first we have Moses reiterating the story, telling the people, like, throughout the story, don't mingle with the other cultures, don't worship their gods and get assimilated in. You're a chosen generation. He's giving them their specific identity. Then when we're at Yeshua's time, again, this is an identity thing, but it's like the flip of what we see now. Like, the argument is, do Gentiles convert and become Jews? Right? Now, a lot of people believe if a Jewish person believes in Yeshua, they lose their Jewish identity and they become a Christian.
Right.
And so we see throughout this whole thing of how you worship the Lord and what your identity is before Him, and not to lose your identity or get assimilated into something that you're not. And so I feel like that is kind of constantly reiterated of who you are, how you worship the Lord, and what your personal walk is supposed to look like with Him. And I think a lot of times when we're reading the New Testament, we're reading Acts in particular, so much of this question is, what do we do with the Gentiles? And then we see so many years later the big flip with the church going, okay, if you believe in the Messiah, which this was like for the Gentiles, if you believe in the Messiah, this is what it looks like. Now for the Jews, it's like, if you believe in the Messiah, the church is telling them what they should look like. So we are seeing this unity with distinction thing is a huge wrestle.
For sure.
Like, what is my role and how am I supposed to walk this out?
Yeah, absolutely. It's good. I'm going to circle back to the actual portion for a little bit. Because those of you who came in, we are going to end a little bit early today because I have to be somewhere else. So we're just gonna have extra time to drink coffee. So we are gonna end a little bit early, but we have another 10-ish minutes. So coming back to our actual portion, and even just kind of what brought up some of this, because we're talking, bigger picture this morning about like what is the role of Deuteronomy, and so like, right. So it's interesting that it starts out, and a lot of this is Moses speaking. Moses has several long speeches, more or less, in the book of Deuteronomy, and he's starting out, right, talking about basically we sent the spies into the land, and it didn't go so well, and here we are in the wilderness. And I think this is so interesting, right? And this is like, so he's talking about all of this. He's talking about they're complaining and wanting to go back to Egypt. And in this is chapter 1. We'll start at verse 29. It says, "Then I said to you, don't tremble or be afraid of them." And he's talking about the people in the land. "He himself will fight for you, just as he did for you in Egypt before your own eyes, and in the wilderness, where you saw how Adonai your God carried you as a man carries his son everywhere you went up until you came to this place. Yet for all this you did not trust in Adonai your God, the one who goes with the way to scout out a place for you to camp and to show you in the way you should go, in fire by night and cloud by day." So this is like one of the things where I'm like, I feel this, right? Like I feel this, like they didn't trust him. They had his manifest presence. He is supernaturally sustaining them, and they didn't trust him. And so there is a bit of this calling out of like, hey, you had this opportunity. This is what the Lord says, and you chose not to trust him. And the Lord becomes angry, and then it talks about the fact that Caleb and Joshua did, follow the Lord, basically. And then in verse 38, "Joshua, son of Nun, who stands before you, will enter there. Encourage him, for he will enable Israel to inherit it." So I think this progression of, and this continued encouragement that Joshua has been set as the next leader, and that they need to follow him, maybe better than they followed Moses, because he is going to lead them into their inheritance, right? And the portion I'm going to skip, we'll come back, but I'm going to skip ahead even to the very end of this week's portion, which is Deuteronomy 3, verse 21. And this is basically talking about them actually going into the land. He says, "I commanded Joshua at that time, saying, your eyes have seen all that Adonai your God has done to these two kings." It's talking about Sihon and Og defeating them at the word of the Lord, basically. "Will do the same to all the kingdoms you are about to cross into. You must not fear them, for it is Adonai your God who fights for you." So he's already given them, and I think this is one of the things I like about some of this summary in Deuteronomy. It very much has the back and forth. It has the Lord said this and you did this, whether that was good or bad. But the Lord promises, but in like situations like this where they have had that measure of success, they have had this kind of almost like taste of what's to come, and seen that the Lord can deliver these powerful people into their hands, and they can be defeated by Israel, that he, sets them up to be like, this can continue to happen again. And why? So that they will continue to be obedient, because the Lord tends to have different strategies than people do. And so when he asks them to do things that seem a little strange, they need to listen, right? They need to do it. Another kind of macro level idea about Deuteronomy that I really like talks about even like the motivation. In that, like, Deuteronomy is explaining Torah to motivate people to have faith and be obedient, right? And some of the commentaries I also talk about, like, it does emphasize, like, it's important that their obedience comes out of love. Like, obedience without loving God is nothing. It's meaningless. And I like this one too. Not just because it talks about Leviticus, but it's comparing like Leviticus with Deuteronomy. And he says, Leviticus often grounds motivation for laws in the self-declaration of Adonai's identity, such as like in Leviticus, you see a lot of time it will, give all these instructions and says, I am Adonai your God, or I am Adonai. So it has this, these are the instructions, I'm God, you should follow them, is kind of a little bit how Leviticus lays it out. Deuteronomy frequently motivates by grounding Israel's identity in the redemptive narrative. This shows that redemption leads to obedience and not the other way around. So again, like even just how we see Moses telling the story, right, in these first couple chapters, is like, is very much like, but God, right? But God showed up and God did all of these things. Therefore, you need to follow him. You need to remember what he's done for you. There's a lot of emphasis on remembering the story, right? Which we've talked about as a principle and a foundational principle, even within Judaism, of like, right? Like all the holidays are about remembering, right? Right. What holiday is coming up? And even actually tonight at sundown begins Tish B'Av, which is not a biblical holiday, but it is, it's this great morning, right? And I can't remember all of them now, but Tom actually has a document of all these things. It's this interesting date that on the Jewish calendar, all these terrible things have happened to the Jewish people. So it's a day, kind of identificational mourning for all the terrible things that had been done to the Jewish people. Traditional to read the Book of Lamentations on Tish B'Av, traditional to fast, and just remember all the terrible things that have happened to the Jewish people.
Temple destructions?
Yes,
Yeah.
both temples were destroyed on Tish B'Av.
Despised,
Yeah.
rejecting the land.
Yes, yes. And then like as you go through history, even
Some Nazi things.
yes, there's things that connected with World War II that fall on that date on the Jewish calendar. It's really kind of fascinating. But also remembering. That's why I said, why did I bring that up? Remembering. It's like it is important to remember. It's important to remember what God has done and how he's been faithful in obedience, and it's important to remember when things went bad, right? It's important to remember the consequence for the disobedience. Yeah.
This might be way too, so feel free to, Marshall, that's not. Does that almost seem to indicate that Satan has some control over time? I mean, that so many satanic things happen to the Jewish people on that day?
No. I think that I don't think that anything gives Satan control over time. I think Satan only does what God allows, which is a hard thing to wrestle with also. But I think I actually think that and I don't know that I could fully make this argument very quickly right now, but I think we could almost argue that God allowing some of these big things to happen all on the same date is meant to get people's attention, of just because some of them, and there's a lot. I mean, it kind of depends on what situation we're looking at, but even like destruction of the temples. Does God allow the destruction of the temples if his people are being obedient and doing what they're supposed to? No. So in some sense, there's a consequence. Often, sometimes there are evil people, but there's often consequence for disobedience playing out. So I actually think that there's it'd be interesting. I don't know. I haven't thought about this long enough to be able to, like I said, eloquently talk about this, but I think in some sense, the fact that so many of these things have happened on the same date on the Jewish calendar are meant to call us to repent, right? One of the things that Tom always says, when, people put a lot of prophetic weight on things like blood moons or other supernatural things, and it's what should our response to all these things be? Repent. Yeah. What is our response to disaster and terrible things happening? For the kingdom of God is near, right? I think that there's a couple things. I think for the Jewish people, the fact that the Jewish people still remain, despite the incredible amount of persecution and attempts to wipe them out, exists. can also point to, in the midst of the mourning for all the terrible things that have happened, can also point to a faithful God who doesn't turn his back on his people. And I think as for Gentile believers in Yeshua, we can say we don't want to be a part of that. And we want to, repent for anything in our history and in church history that has aligned with those things that have been done, as well as it should stir up intercession, right, for the Jewish people to know their Messiah. So that's as far as I think I can go right now with that. But no, I don't think that because I don't think that God was sitting there, man, it's Tish B'Av, this is happening again. I don't think he sits there and goes and is blindsided by that. I think that he understands everything that's happening in time and why it lines up the way it does. So we need to wrap up because, like I said, I need to go be somewhere else. But what I wanted us to think about, and I think we've meandered our way through many topics, but is what we're seeing is as we're coming to the end of the Torah, and yes, even though we will, come at the end of Sukkot, we will flip back and go back to Genesis. If you think in terms of going through the rest of the Tanakh, the rest of the Bible, reading Deuteronomy through the eyes of what is this setting us up for? What is this showing us about, again, this paradigm that I feel like the Lord was really highlighting to me this week of just Deuteronomy is okay, you've been given the Torah, and now this is, exhorting the people of Israel into how you live now that you've been given the Torah and are about to go into your promised land and receive your inheritance, paired with, as we're reading the book of Acts, the Messiah has come and done what he said, and he's given us the Holy Spirit, right? He's given us this helper, and now how do you live with this, in this reality that the Messiah has now come, which is, turns out, the point in history that we're still living in. So, as we're awaiting his second return. So anyway, I hope that that's helpful. I hope that it's maybe we can, as we continue to move through Deuteronomy in the next couple of months, we can continue to kind of think that way of what is this, Moses seems to have a purpose in mind of he's setting them up. He's trying to set them up well, right, to go into the land, even though he doesn't get to go with them. So what do we learn about how we look, how we see the character of God as he's about to bring them into, and how do we remember that it's not too difficult, right? Choose life, not death. The Torah is not too difficult for us. His commandments, what he requires of us is not too difficult for us. And also we have the Holy Spirit to help us. And so if he's called us to do and be something and he's given us the Holy Spirit, it's not too difficult. So Shabbat Shalom.